ever get that feeling.
Mm.
Like the system's just not working.
Mm.
And maybe, just maybe, taking things into your own hands is the only way to get justice.
Yeah.
It's a tough one, right? I
Oh.
mean, we're told vigilantism, that's bad news, dangerous, undermines the law, the whole deal.
Right.
But then, what about those times when it's the powerful who are in the wrong?
Ah, now that's where things get really interesting.
You know what I mean? Like those situations where it seems like the law just doesn't apply to them.
Yeah, you're talking about power dynamics then. Who gets to decide what justice even looks like?
Exactly.
Right?
I bet everyone listening has felt that frustration at some point.
For sure.
Like a huge company does something that'd land any one of us in jail, but they get a slap on the wrist. It makes you wonder.
Makes you wonder if sometimes taking the law into your own hands, especially against those at the top, could ever actually be the right thing to do.
You hit the nail on the head.
Oh.
But before we go there, we gotta define what we even mean by vigilantism.
Right, gotta have a starting point.
It's not just like any illegal act, is it?
No, it's way more specific than that. We're talking about actions taken by a regular person.
Not the police or anything.
Exactly, a private citizen, and they're trying to force someone to do something they don't want to do.
So there's an element of coercion there.
Absolutely. And the big thing is, the vigilante, they're stepping in where the official authority should be.
They're deciding what justice is and then acting on it.
That's it, yeah.
So does that always mean violence? Or could it be other things?
Oh, it can take a lot of forms. We're talking threats, hacking, even just massive social pressure that makes someone do something out of fear.
Fear's a powerful motivator.
For sure. Think of, like, those online campaigns where people expose some bigwig doing something shady and they get shamed into quitting their job.
Ah, I see what you mean.
No punches thrown,
Yep.
but they definitely forced that person's hand, right? Took the law into their own hands, you could say.
Okay, I'm with you on the definition. But why is vigilantism usually seen as such a bad thing? Why are we all taught it's wrong?
Well, there are some pretty serious moral objections. You can't talk about this without talking about due process.
Right, the idea that everyone deserves a fair trial, the chance to defend themselves, all that.
Exactly. Vigilantes, they skip all that. They're judge, jury, and sometimes, well, executioner all rolled into one.
And there's no safeguards to make sure they don't get it wrong.
Big risk there, yeah.
And what about democracy itself?
Ooh, good point.
I mean, we vote for people to make and enforce the laws. If everyone just starts doing their own thing, the whole system falls apart, doesn't it?
You're absolutely right. It creates chaos. You lose faith in the legal system. People are more likely to just take the law into their own hands, and it just spirals from there.
And not to mention, there's always the risk that it's just a personal vendetta disguised as justice.
Oh, 100%. It's a slippery slope, that's for sure. And then there's the question of harm.
Harm.
Yeah, I mean, vigilantes, they're often working with incomplete information.
Or biases, right?
Exactly. So they can end up punishing the wrong person, and sometimes brutally.
So even if the intention is good, things can go very wrong.
No doubt.
But here's what I keep coming back to. What about those situations where it's the powerful, the ones at the top, who are clearly abusing their position?
Yeah, I see where you're going with this.
And the legal system, it doesn't seem to be holding them accountable. It feels like a double standard. So is there ever a point, even if it means breaking the law, that taking action against them is the right thing to do?
That is the million-dollar question. Philosophers have been wrestling with that one for centuries. It's especially tricky when you're talking about systemic injustice, when it seems like the powerful are playing by a different set of rules.
Like when a corporation pollutes an entire community and gets a tiny fine, or a politician does something shady and just gets away with it. It makes you wonder if the scales ever need to be rebalanced somehow.
To even start to answer that, you have to look at the specifics. What's motivating this vigilante? What could happen because of their actions? And maybe most importantly, are there any other options?
So it's not just about, does this person deserve to be punished? It's more about, is this the way to actually get justice?
That's a better way to put it, yeah. You gotta think about the potential harm, what it does to the legal system in the long run, and if there might be other ways to deal with the injustice that don't go as far.
That makes sense. So let's say we have a situation where the powerful are definitely abusing their power, and the legal system, it's failed to hold them accountable. What kind of things would we need to think about to decide if vigilantism might be, well, morally okay in that case?
Okay, good question. Well, first off, it can't be about revenge.
Like just getting back at someone for something they did to you.
Yeah, exactly. True justice. It has to be impartial.
Not just about getting even.
Right. It can't be driven by anger or some need for payback.
It's about the principle of the thing.
Exactly. It's about holding what's right, not just taking someone down because you don't like them.
Because that just opens the door for anyone to do whatever they want.
Oh, yeah. Anyone could just say, oh, they wronged me, and use that to justify anything.
That's a scary thought. So impartiality, that's a big one. What else is there?
Transparency. That's huge, too. Whatever the vigilante's doing and why they're doing it, it has to be clear to everyone. They can't be operating in the shadows,
So no secret society.
No secret codes of justice or anything like that.
They can't just be like the Punisher or Batman.
Right. It's about bringing the injustice to light, letting everyone see what's happening and why they're taking action.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about the punishment itself? How do we make sure it fits the crime?
Especially when we're talking about powerful people who are used to getting away with everything.
Right. It's easy to say the punishment should fit the crime. But who gets to decide that?
That's the tricky part, yeah. Even when we're talking about holding the powerful accountable, there has to be some kind of check on things. You can't just go overboard.
So even when we're dealing with powerful people who've done really bad things, you can't just throw fairness and due process out the window.
Absolutely not. Actually, those things become even more important. Because if you're saying it's okay to take these extreme measures,
then you got to be extra careful that they're really justified.
you got it. This reminds me of those historical examples we see sometimes.
Like what?
People fighting against systems that were really oppressive. Like the people who helped slaves escape to freedom, even though it was against the law back then.
Yeah, they were definitely breaking the law.
But they were also fighting for something bigger than themselves.
Right. A higher moral principle.
Exactly. And that brings up the question, does that kind of thing count as justifiable vigilantism?
It's a really interesting question.
It really shows you how complicated this whole thing is.
Yeah.
Because in those cases, the law itself was seen as unjust.
Like it was upholding a system that was morally wrong.
Yeah. And so breaking the law was seen as a necessary act of resistance.
So it's like when the sister itself is corrupt. When the law is being used to protect the powerful and hurt the vulnerable.
Then sometimes defying that law might be the only way to get real justice.
That's a powerful argument.
It's an argument that a lot of people throughout history have made, those who fight against tyranny and oppression.
But even then, it's not something to be taken lightly.
No. Definitely not.
I mean, who decides when a law is so bad that it's okay to break it?
That's the danger. It could set a really bad precedent.
Like, what if everyone just started deciding which laws they wanted to follow?
That's why it's so important to have some kind of guidelines to make sure any action taken is truly justified.
And not just an excuse for personal gain or revenge.
Exactly. You have to be able to look at it and say, this is about something bigger than just one person's grievances.
Okay, so we've talked about impartiality, transparency, proportionality. Is there anything else we need to think about when we're trying to figure out if vigilantism against the powerful could ever be okay?
Yes, definitely. There are two more crucial elements. The first is that any action taken has to be focused on protecting the vulnerable.
What do you mean?
It can't just be about maintaining the status quo or just shifting power from one group to another.
So it can't just be about taking down the powerful.
Right.
Just because.
Right. It has to be about making things better for the people who are actually being harmed by the system.
About uplifting the people who've been oppressed.
Exactly. Not just punishing the oppressor. And that brings us to the second crucial element.
Which is?
The end goal should always be to create a society where vigilantism isn't needed anymore.
So it's not about getting rid of the system and replacing it with vigilantes.
No, it's about fixing the system so that everyone has a fair chance at justice.
So the powerful are held accountable through the right channels.
Exactly. And that the law applies equally to everyone.
So that people don't feel like they have to take the law into their own hands anymore.
That's what we should be working towards. A system where vigilantism isn't seen as necessary or even desirable.
I see what you mean. It's about a future where everyone feels safe and protected.
And where everyone has equal access to justice.
But how do we get there? How do we fix a system that seems so broken? Especially when the people in power benefit from things staying the way they are.
It's a huge challenge, no doubt. But it starts with awareness.
Awareness.
With recognizing the problems and understanding how the system is failing people. It means holding those in power accountable.
And demanding transparency and fairness.
Exactly. And working towards a society that's more just and equitable for everyone.
That sounds like a lot of work.
It is, but it has to start somewhere, right?
I guess so. And every little bit helps.
It does. Every time someone speaks out against injustice, every effort to hold the powerful accountable, every step towards a more just society brings us closer to that goal.
This has given me a lot to think about, that's for sure. It's amazing how complex this whole idea of vigilantism is, especially when it comes to challenging the powerful.
It is.
And there are definitely no easy answers. Yeah. But I think the biggest thing I'm taking away from this is that we need to keep talking about these things.
Yeah.
Keep questioning how things are and keep fighting for a world where justice is really for everyone.
I agree with that.
Now I'm curious, are there any real-world examples where you think vigilantism against the powerful was actually the right thing to do?
Ooh, that's a tough one. It's hard to judge from the outside, without knowing all the details. But there are definitely some historical examples that I think can shed some light on this whole moral dilemma thing.
Like what?
Well, think about the French resistance during World War II.
Okay, yeah.
They were working outside the law, sometimes even using violence against the people in power.
But they were fighting against a really oppressive regime.
Exactly. And they were risking their lives to protect people.
And to help liberate France.
Right. It's hard to say what they did was wrong, even though technically they were breaking the law.
That's where context comes in.
You got it. You can't just look at actions without considering the whole picture.
The motivations, the consequences, the alternative.
Exactly.
It's like sometimes the law itself doesn't line up with what feels right.
But it happens.
And then you have to choose between following your conscience or following the rules.
It's tough, and it really makes you think.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Makes you think about what justice really means.
And who gets to decide what's right and wrong?
Yeah, because when the system that's supposed to protect us fails,
or even worse, when it becomes a tool of oppression,
it makes you question everything.
It challenges all those fundamental beliefs we have about the law and how society's supposed to work.
It's like a paradox.
Yeah.
We need laws to keep things from falling apart.
Right.
But then those same laws can be used to create injustice.
Yeah, it's a tough one. So where does that leave us?
Good question.
I think it leaves us with the responsibility to think critically about these things.
To really engage with these tough questions.
And to work towards a world where we don't need vigilantism.
Especially against the powerful.
Exactly.
So it's not about condoning violence or saying it's okay to break the law.
No, not at all. It's about creating a society where everyone has equal access to justice.
And where power isn't abused.
Right. Where everyone is held accountable for their actions.
That sounds like a pretty ideal world.
It is. It might even seem impossible.
But I guess we have to try.
We do. And every step we take towards more transparency and accountability, every step towards fairness, it brings us closer to that vision.
Well, this has been a really eye-opening conversation.
It has been.
It's made me realize just how complicated this whole issue of vigilantism really is.
There are so many layers to it.
Especially when it comes to the powerful.
Yeah.
There are definitely no easy answers.
Definitely not. But I think the most important thing we can do is keep talking about it.
Keep asking those tough questions.
And keep pushing for a better world.
A world where justice is truly for everyone. Speaking of pushing for a better world,
Yeah.
if anyone out there wants to dig a little deeper into this whole vigilante thing,
I'd recommend checking out a song by Ry Cooder.
Oh yeah, what's it called?
Vigilante, man. It really captures that feeling of righteous anger.
Against the people in power who abuse it.
Yeah, definitely worth a listen.
Absolutely.